being at sea in a small boat is very much like being on a rocket ship going to the end of the universe. You're in this tiny little box. Everything that happens on it's on you. Whatever happens to the boat or you have to be able to fix.
Today we're talking about safety at sea, and we're going to be doing an interview with Joe Cooper, whose sailing experience out in the ocean is bordering on legendary. This guy has a lot of great advice if you're trying to get out there and take your boat out in the ocean. This is only about 20 minutes of our conversation that I made for you guys here, but if you want to get your hands on the whole hour of us talking, I'll let you know at the end how you can do that. You have this amazing sailing resume from, I was reading over your website and everything, from sailing dinghies, racing all over the world, America's Cup racing, doing deliveries, and right now you're teaching sailing. The big questions I have are for our readers that are trying to set their boats up for some sort of ocean passage. And you know a lot about setting up a boat to sail to Bermuda and things like that. So if we have a 50-year-old professional sort of family and they want to sail their 40-foot Beneteau, and do some ocean passages and do it safely, how would you tell them to sort of set out a safe sail plan, and what should they learn?
Because I have exactly that customer profile, on my roster, except it's Jeanot. So we're assuming they've taken sailing lessons and they've got to the point where their insurance company will let them buy a 40-foot, $500,000 boat.
Yeah, let's assume like ASA, the first 5 ASAs.
Right, exactly so. So that's all great, but the main thing they have to come to terms with is discovering what they don't know. That you don't know what you don't know at this point. So the very first thing I would suggest they do is get a copy or download a copy of what's known in the trade as a special regs, which is formally the special regulations for offshore sailing. And you probably know that document. And you can download it from World Sailing. And it is updated annually. And it is a compendium of specifications, which for the boat, which by and large they can ignore. But it is also recommendations, kind of punch lists, and all of this information comes from actual incidents that have been reported to World Sailing, or this World Sailing Special Regs Committee has found, and they have assessed and analyzed and reviewed, and they've gone over each incident, and they've assembled a list of recommendations, and that's gone around the room and so on and so forth. The point is, this booklet is serious, hands-on, experiential stuff. And so when it is in that book, there's a really good reason for it. And get that and read it and then study it. But you want to go to things like, make sure you have all the heavy things secured. And when I was building my Mini, my frame of reference for that was, okay, the big sky god grabs my boat by the keel, flips it upside down and shakes it. Okay, everything in the boat has to not move.
Mm-hmm.
And so batteries are a prime example. Anchors, a second anchor that's stowed in the lazarette around where the satellite phone antenna connects. The boxes of tools, the stove. One that I see a lot is the top of the fridge. In a lot of boats, you just pick it up. It's not hinged and it's not secured. So go through the boat, front to back, top to bottom, and make a note of all the heavy things, and then figure out a way to secure them. And I mean, secure them like it's upside down. Hopefully they won't get that way. But if you're sailing and you get hit sideways by a wave, if you saw the video of Cole getting launched across the boat, imagine that being a 50-pound toolbox. Okay, so that's the first thing I would do. And then when they've come to terms with that and made their own punch list and walked through the boat and thought about it, the next thing they should do is a safety at sea seminar. But a couple with a couple of kids and maybe one of their mates who might or might not sail or might not be an excellent seaman, if they go offshore, when they go offshore, and they get into trouble, the roller furling jib, furling line chafes and the sail comes undone in 35 knots of breeze. Okay, that goes from being a chafe line to a big problem in about 1 nanosecond. And if you're on a race boat, 40-foot race boat with 10 guys, it's a pain in the butt. It's not a problem. If you're on your 40-foot, subject boat and something like that happens, it's going to happen at 2 a.m. in the Gulf Stream blowing 35.
Yeah.
So everything that they can do to teach themselves, to prepare, to think about what's going to happen. You might have seen underneath my email signature, it says the questions are more important than the answers. That is the way they should be approaching it. And then the third thing with it, that you can do online safety at sea. There's 15 chapters. You buy the book, you can do it online. And then they really should go and do the hands-on seminars. And I volunteer for managing some of those. I'm going to one in April up at Roger Williams here. They are seriously down and dirty hands-on. You get to figure out how to stop a leak in a boat. The CCA's built up the side of a boat and a rig where you can, pour water in through different holes in the boat. And, the guy pairs us off into teams and you've got to go fix the leak. Okay. Fire extinguishers, you get, they go through all the different types of fire extinguishers and then you get to handle one and put out a fire. When was the last time you had to go somewhere and put out a fire?
Right.
Never. Right, unless you've been to a safety at sea seminar. Flares, you get instructed on what flares do what, and then you go loose them. Okay, you fire off flares. And, it's absolutely normal for, the guys and the girls to be holding this thing and going, ooh, ooh, ooh. Okay? You don't want to have that experience the first time when you really need it.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you wouldn't think about having your kids go and play a lacrosse game without having practiced. You wouldn't go and try to pitch a deal to somebody without having gone through it 16 ways to Sunday. You don't think about proposing to your wife without, going through it mentally in your head 19 ways to Sunday. So learn about the experiences of people that do it for a living, reading the offshore regs, go and do the online safety at sea, and then go and do a hands-on safety at sea. And then go home and write down all the questions that they didn't answer. In the Northeast, there's something called the Northern Ocean Racing Symposium. And it was concocted by the organizing committees of the Bermuda 1-2, the Marion Bermuda race, and the Halifax race. And it is a one-day seminar. We just did it a couple of weeks ago. And it covers all of the stuff that isn't covered in a safety at sea seminar. Now, safety at sea seminars are structured by World Sailing, certainly for racing. Okay, big percentages of the crew of race boats have to have undertaken a safety at sea within a certain time frame. But there's nothing that says somebody who's not racing can't do it, and I think they should do it. It's ridiculously good value and information and thought-provoking.
I guess going outside the boat, then the next question was, how do we set up the deck and the cockpit for sailing? Well-fitting PFDs are obvious, but as coastal cruisers, should we be interested in harnesses and tethers and jack lines and all that stuff?
Yes. Next question.
Just absolutely asking.
So here's the thing. We are admonished and hit over the head and told 6 ways to Sunday, wear your PFD. Okay. Now, in our mythical family here, a guy and his wife and a couple of kids, typically if the husband, the guy goes overboard, and this is changing, but I'm not saying anything new, but typically the female part of these crews is dramatically less experienced than the guys. That's changing and changing dramatically. But if the guy goes overboard unless his wife or whoever, the woman, the women in the program have really, really studied that particular episode, man overboard, crew overboard, and practiced the recovery. The PFD, it's, you don't want to say a waste of time because I get smacked, but the PFD is only going to keep the guy afloat for, X number of hours, unless he can be recovered. Now, today with AIS, personal AIS beacons, if they're coastal, near shore, running down Long Island Sound, San Francisco Bay, Chesapeake, there's a pretty good chance that he's gonna ping up on somebody's AIS, and that boat is going to be able to come and scrape him up. Now, all of that said, my recommendation would be to focus much more on jacklines and being tethered in, because the goal of all of this is don't get off the boat. You don't just fall off the boat. Something happens and it pushes you off one way or the other. Okay. And so rule one is, stay on the boat. Rule two is see rule one. And so I think tethers are, a lot more value than the PFDs. Yeah.
We've got, paper charts, absolute must, but then we have to make a choice between these big fancy chart plotters or the guy using his iPhone. What would you say? What advice would you give that family as far as navigation goes?
So once again, can you use your iPhone? Sure. If you're going, down here, if you're going from Newport to Block Island, but it's required that the master of the vessel plot his position using all means available. You can't just rely on the GPS. And, you can say, oh, I got a story about that. I was bringing a boat down the Chesapeake going to Charleston, J44, guy just bought it. And we're banging down the bay and it's kind of bumpy. And we decided we were going to pull into somewhere in Norfolk. And so I went downstairs and I made up some notes and I plotted, a couple of different ways into the harbor from different lights and so on. And while I was in the middle of this, the boat went dark. I'm like, okay. And stick my head out the hatch and go, what's going on? And they're like, I don't know. Did you turn anything off? And I'm like, no. So we started investigating, and it turns out that the guy had new batteries installed after the purchase, and the guys that installed them hadn't cinched down the nuts on the end of the terminal cables. The cable had come off. Okay. So here we are right down in the mouth of Norfolk with half the US Navy going in and out of there and ferries and ships and God knows what. And no GPS. And, nobody had a handheld in those days because the handhelds was pretty big. And so, their guys on deck are going, well, what are we going to do? And I said, well, we're going to do this. And I found a light and I said, go to that light. When we get there, we sail that way at that course. And I had it, written down on the wet notes. And we went doodling into the dock just like we planned. So you can't rely on one source is, I suppose, the takeaway. And, if it's a short hop, sure, use your phone or your tablet. But please don't make it your primary source of navigation. Learn the skills of plotting, piloting. Okay. They're fun, I bought a boat up from Tortola one year. I was the skipper of it. And just for chuckles, I ran a plotting log alongside, different book, but alongside the GPS. And I didn't look at the GPS for the 7 days it took us to get within range of Bermuda. And when we were in range of Bermuda, I looked at my plot and compared it with the GPS, and we were out by about 5 miles. So it's, people have sailed around the world without GPS forever, and just don't use it as a crutch. Use it as something that is there, but, be cynical about it.
On the out of sight of land thing, one of the questions we had was if your spouse is a little scared of sailing at night, And especially sailing out of sight of land. There's a lot of people that get a little bit worried about that.
Sure.
How can you get somebody used to that kind of sailing or make them more prepared for it?
Okay. So I was thinking about this the other day, and start slowly. You don't go run a marathon right off the bat. You do a 5K and so on and so forth. Um, you could do a couple of things. You could go out on your boat one evening, after work at night, and motor around. Up here you could, Narragansett, you could motor out and go around the offshore, the Moe offshore mark, the ship channel mark, and just get a sense of what it feels like. What different lights look like, what beaver tail light looks like, what the characteristics of the light are, what an R2 bell looks like when it's flashing. Okay, just get the hang of it slowly. You don't have to sail. Um, I would do that and bring somebody who is competent just to be there. So, with a third hand's always a good thing. Then maybe you could go with someone else or get somebody else to operate your boat, and you spend time with whoever it is that's nervous about it. Maybe it's your kids, your teenage kids. They got to have fun too, but they got to get the hang of it. And so just, walk before you can run, go out and play in the environment before it becomes important.
Yeah.
I got a T-shirt I made up for the high school kids that has a bunch of Cooperisms, about 12 Cooperisms on the back of it, and one of them is "Till the time is king." So go out and sail.
Is that the same thing going to be for sailing in bad weather? I mean, we try to avoid bad weather when we can, but how does somebody, I guess, with the whole philosophy of it's about preparedness, it's about that state of mind, right? And that's what I'm getting from you is get into a state of mind where you're prepared for all of these things that might happen. Um, what are we doing for bad weather? How do we get prepared for that? We're going to have to sail through it on passage. How do we get ourselves there mentally?
So again, understanding, and this goes back to reading about the weather and some of the oceanography, what causes waves, why do they happen, why are they different, what's a rogue wave, okay, all of that stuff. Read up on it. A lot of the boats that I see that I work with are people like our hypothetical client here. They need a lot of work on the boat to make it suitable to carry the kinds of sails and the reefing arrangement you need to sail in heavy weather. Now, having said that, the answer to the question is go sail in heavy weather. Every time it's blowing 25 knots around here, you barely see any boats. Okay. Why? Because they all have 130 roll-up jibs and, now more frequently in mast furling. Okay. Well, that's, an invitation to jam. And so the first thing would be to, again, going back through your special regs book, there's a discussion in there in section 4 about heavy weather sails, storm sails, why they're the size they are, what they need on them. And, read up on that, understand why a heavy weather jib is so named and why it is as small as it is. Okay. Then once your boat's set up, go out and practice. You don't have to sail to Tortola the first day. Around here, you could leave Newport and sail halfway to Block Island and back in 25 knots of sou'wester. And the number of people that I've helped set up their boats and then gone sailing in that scenario, 25 knots halfway to Block Island, say, wow, that was really good fun. Because, the roll-up jib isn't flapping around and they were able to get reefs in the mainsail properly. The thing about reefing the mainsail is you're not only making it smaller, but you have to make it flatter. And very few, I'm sorry for the production boat guys, but very few production boats come out of the box with a really effective reefing system that and pop can do from the cockpit in 35 seconds.
You had mentioned Cole Brauer. Can you talk to me about that boat? How was that boat set up? What can we learn? What can I learn on my 40-foot mom and pop Beneteau
Mm-hmm.
from how that boat was set up? Because it just went around the world. I mean,
Right. Class 40s, Cole's boat. The preamble to this is that the guy who commissioned the boat about 2007, 2008 intended to use it as the Class 40 single-handed, double-handed out in the ocean. So a lot of the basics of the boat were built in from scratch. So things like this ease of reefing, they have huge mainsails and they get overpowered pretty quickly. They're, Formula One, more or less, small ones, Formula Ford. And so you need to be able to depower them pretty quickly. And so that boat had what I call double line reefing. So there was a reef line at the leech and a matching reef line for that reef at the luff. And the trick there is you have a mark on the halyard and you lower the halyard to the first reef mark. You wind down on the first reef at the luff, then you wind in on the first reef at the leech and retrim the mainsail and go down and put the kettle on.
Yep.
There was a huge amount of equipment on the boat. She had spares for the spares. She was ridiculously well prepared. And she had a really good short team with a gazillion miles behind them. Some of the guys were really, really top level guys. And so there was a lot of preparation before she left the dock. She was down at Newport Shipyard and, I'd go down. I knew her from before anyway. So I'd go down there and watch what was going on and talk to the guys and so on. And the short version there is that everything was in compartments in Rubbermaid bins. And the bins were stored, this boat is 40 feet, but it's quite different from your 40-foot cruising Beneteau. It's meant to have stuff in boxes, in racks, tied down, and that's not really viable for, the average bear with his cruising boat. So she had all of this gear. It was all tied down. The sail inventory was such that she could keep sailing. One of my particular isms is success in an ocean race is being able to sail at 90% full speed 90% of the time. And to do that, you need to be able to change gears, so make sail changes for wind and direction and speed as fast as possible. So she had the outside jib was on a roller, and she had an inside staysail that was on a roller. And so she could roll up one, unroll the other, probably less time than it takes to say it. And that's a very viable combination. The upside with the Class 40s is the front jibs, the outside jibs are only about 105%. So you don't have the issue of having to drag a big general or even a 110 or 115 Yankee around the staysail. So in that sense, she could do gear changes very, very quickly.
I'll leave you with a few final words of wisdom from Joe, but before I do, can you take a second to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. Leave a comment below on what you do to get your boat ready for safe passage through ocean miles. Also, if you want to get your hands on the full hour-long conversation I had with Joe, we're going to make that whole thing available to Practical Sailor subscribers that subscribe on the Practical Sailor website. I'll leave a link in the description on how to get that video.
We get so wrapped up in our sailing, and it is so much fun, and we have such a good time with it, that it doesn't take long before we think we're better than we really are. Every time I get on a boat, I'm still learning stuff. Every time I go to a safety at sea, I'm still learning stuff. It's coaching the high school kids. Some famous person once said that the more you teach, the more you learn. That is absolutely dead right.